Hi, and welcome to Discovering DataFlex. In this episode, we're not going to go into the code as much. We are looking at the database. And I want to make a video where I go through kind of all the different things that can go wrong in the database and the application and the layers in between to have like a checklist. So when you feel that the data is not where it's supposed to be, you can look at this video, go through all the steps and figure out what's gone wrong. So that's the intention of this video. So let's dive into the list of things that can go wrong. First of all, it's a really good thing to take a backup of the database, and you probably have an automated script to do this. But before you do any changes or start to do anything, you should go in and look at tasks and backup. And here we want to add a place where we want to do the backup. So just enter the path. And in this case, I might want to put it in the Discovering DataFlex demo. I'm just going to put it here, and I'm going to give it a file name. So I would usually call it backup date, and then .back, and click OK. Okay, so now we have it here, and we can go in and set some different options, but I think this is good for now, and we click OK. And we are done. So now we should be able to go into the folder and see that we do have a backup here. Now, when you copy backup files from a server to a development machine, or you want to publish something from your development machine and upload it to a server, you want to make sure that the version of the database is the same. And you can check this is number 15 and this is 14. So you want to have the same version of the database on the other machine. Otherwise, MSSQL will complain about it. So now when we got one, we want to make a restore. And it's almost the same process. You go into tasks and restore database. And then we want to pick from device. And you want to add the file. And in this case, we want to go back to our Discovering DataFlex demo. Here is the backup file, and click OK. So now we have this backup file, and you probably also want to check this box here, overwrite existing database, because if you have something changes or something that updates, you want to replace everything when you import the database. Then you just click OK, and the database will be imported on top of your existing database. So those are the first steps that you want to take. Now over to what can go wrong with your DataFlex application. One of the first things to check if you have some issues with tables and stuff is you have the tables here. You can always go into the tables, check the columns. If you double click on them, you get a list of columns, and you have the indexes down here. And you probably know this, but you can set different indexes and relationships. So these should be correctly set up. Another tool is the database builder that you can use to check different things. And if you have some issues with the relationships between tables, you can check them here. And just pick select all and start checking. And now you get a list here and you have match. So you can just check the status out here and see that everything is in order. If it's not in order, you might want to go in and check what's going on. And usually it's things like the size of the ID here or location ID. This is 6. If I go into the location table and look here, this should also have the same size and same type. Otherwise, you will have issues with your indexes. The next thing that we often run into in Scandinavian countries, at least, it's that your indexes have not been indexed properly, because it might be different character sets and stuff like that. So it's always a good idea to go in and re-index. Just select all, re-index, and you pick all rows and all tables and just run re-index. And it will go through your database and make sure that all the indexes are properly set up. And you also have some other reporting. Check for orphans. So you have these, you can see if there are any orphan tables or orphan items, if you want to check that. Now, while we're in here as well, there's another thing where you can output diff and FD files. And these are files that specify what the database looks like. And we actually have them in our folder in our DDSRC. Here you have the FD files and diff files. And if I go into a FD file, you can see that it says where the tables are, what names they are. So this is used by the application. And the diff files contain a little bit more information. And here you can read about the indexes and stuff like that. But this is a good idea to have in your Git repository, because then you can see if there's any changes to the tables that you want to update on the server as well or something. So you can go into Git and see have any of the databases been updated or any new indexes. So all the information you need is in the diff files. So if you want to update those and make sure that they are up to date with the changes you've made in the database, you output diff and FD files. Select all, output, and you want to check this box as well. If you want the FD files to be updated, just click OK, and it will run and make sure you have the latest versions of the files in your folder. So that's all you have to do. You don't have to maintain them in any other way. You also have the data dictionaries here, but that's more coding and application information about the database. So we're not going to go there today. Sometimes when you want to do a bulk update of your table definitions, you can copy all the diff files into the diff library or in the DD source. So you have the updated diff files. And if you want to update, you can go in here and load diff files. So then you can just pick the file or table number you want to update or create, and you can just pick the diff file you want to get data from. And then give it a name. So I can create a table that is based on this definition. So that's the usage of diff files, or one use of diff files. Another place where data is stored about the application is in the data folder. Here you have these files called int. We can have a look at that. This also contains a lot of information about the indexes, the setup, and this is actually configuration for the data. So if you have a RECNUM table, it says yes here, for instance. If it's not a RECNUM table, it says no. And if you have issues, or if you have changed that or something and you want to check if it's the same on the server as on your development machine, for instance, this is where you want to check. Usually if you have RECNUM, you also have an additional RECNUM table in your list, and you might have some primary keys that you want to check as well. But we're going to go in and check this in the application as well, how that is done. Another thing before we leave this data folder is that we have these CHH files. So we have item.x64.chh, CCH, and that is just cache files. And when you do changes, it could be a good idea just to sort by type and select and delete these files, because they are generated again and again, and they are just cache files. So if something goes wrong and you make changes and you don't see the changes in your application, you might want to clear out the cache files just to make sure that nothing is saved there. In the database builder, you can open a table, and let's say I want to open the item table here now. You have the list here, and this information tells you which indexes are in use, and you can see here what relationships you have, what they relate to. You have the indexes for the data, and you have the parameters. And here you can see, if you go in the ini file that we were looking at here and change this RECNUM value to yes, this checkbox will be checked. You are not supposed to play around with this, but if you have issues, as you see, if I click here up and try to change it, this is disabled. So you really have to know what you're doing and be sure that this is what you want if you want to change that, I guess, because you cannot do it in the interface. Or you have some, there might be some way to do it, and I hope someone will write in the comments and correct me, but I haven't figured out how to change that in the interface, at least. So then you just click here and save. Now, you might have issues where the database says that it don't have access to the tables, something is running, or some process is preventing you from saving. And there are different steps that you might want to consider to make sure that you have access to the files. One is actually to close the open databases in the database builder. And you can also close down the studio. But what most often is the case is that if I click on the application launcher, is that this application is running, and you right click on it and just say stop the process. Then the application will stop. If that doesn't help, then close the studio, close the database builder, just make sure that you don't have anything running that is accessing the server. You might also want to go in to the services, because it might be the SQL database that is doing something. And then you go in here to the services and search for SQL server, and just right click on it and restart. And the server will restart. And it might also be a good idea to restart some of the other here. And if that doesn't work, you can also try to stop, but not if you're going to do anything with the database, I suppose, because then you don't have access to it. It's stopped. So that's one place that you might want to look. In some cases, you might also have the database viewer open. And the database viewer is just a place where you can view the data in the database, basically. So you want to make sure that this database explorer is also closed. If we go back to the data folder and look in the int file, you can see here that we have a server name, DFConID. Here you can actually, in each ini table, create a connection to a separate database. But the default setup these days, if you have an old database, that's usually what was done. You have each ini file has its own connection path. So you have a path to the database. But these days you have the DFConID, which makes it a lot easier to kind of copy and paste between different environments, because you can copy these ini files over to a production environment if you change them. Everything is then maintained in the DFConID. And if I look at that, you can see that here is the ID, and here is the connection string to the database. So this is which database I'm using, and it's updated in one place. So that is also a good thing to know if you're connecting to the wrong database, or if you want to make sure that it's connected properly. So another issue with, if you have RECNUMs in the table and want to compare the RECNUMs with the indexes in the SQL database, you also want to go into the columns fields and check your columns. If it says RECNUM here, you're using a RECNUM for the table, or the table expects there to be a RECNUM defined. But you can go into properties on the column and check if you have an identity increment set to 1. Because if you have that, then the SQL database will automatically increment when you add IDs or new entries to the table. Usually when you do a send request save using the data dictionaries will look up the next ID in the system table where you have your ID stored, and increment the number and use that as identifier. But if the table has an identity increment, then it will increment the ID even if you do a request save. So you might end up with a situation where you have a conflict between the database trying to update the table and DataFlex trying to update the table. So that's just something you want to look out for if you have those kind of issues with the indexes being wacky. That is all I want to share with you today. If there's something I missed, please add it to the comments. If there was something that you didn't know, write that below in the comments as well, so I know, and it might be highlighting the information for someone else who is looking for it. And until next time, have a wonderful week. Bye bye.